This is A World on Purpose.
A purposeful life is the most important kind and the most valuable kind of life.
Every choice that we make makes a difference, for better or worse.
I loved walking in a village and seeing the before and after.
This is the podcast dedicated to those humans choosing to live larger by working for the greater good. And these are their stories. Stories of hope and of true change that come from living on purpose.
What if you were to suddenly say there are no challenges, there are only opportunities?
Regardless of where you come from, your financial identity shouldn't determine where you end up in life.
I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and my hope is that my inspiring guests will take you on an introspective journey that helps you tap into your own pivot to purpose, bringing greater meaning to your life. Welcome to A World on Purpose. Hey everyone, it's Alyssa Fisher-Harris, your host of A World on Purpose, and if you've been watching or listening to the show by now, I think you kind of get the gist of how passionate I am about purpose and about creating this platform that helps tell the stories of others that are living purpose-driven lives in the world. I kind of pinch myself every time I get to spend time with these people I call the purpose change-making heroes you don't know but should, that are doing something for the greater good. But it isn't every day that I get to interview a true legend in purpose. I had the sheer joy of meeting today's guest, Ken Kragen, CEO of Good Hands Productions, back in 2013 through a fantastic LA-based organization called Metal International. Shout out to the original co-founders and my dear friends, Ken Rutkowski and Maya Ross. I love you guys. At the time, I didn't know Ken by his name, but I certainly knew him by the massive global fundraising mechanisms that he ideated and spearheaded, and I'm sure you'll know them too. Those are such endeavors as the global hit song, We Are the World, the massive national initiative called Hands Across America, and other powerful purpose-driven endeavors like Live Aid. I was in awe as I listened to Ken share about the massive effort that these endeavors took to pull off, and how he was driven even harder by his own philosophy that it's much easier to do the impossible than the ordinary. As a manager for some of the most famous musical artists in history, Ken also intuitively knew the power in leveraging all that talent as a force for good. But even more profound for me was that I felt deeply connected to the tangible impact his endeavors made on the lives of people around the world who were homeless or who lived in extreme poverty and were hungry, because that was something I knew way too much about, having experienced it in my own life. So, for Ken to share his longtime life and work and purpose and how he didn't just make the impossible possible and the ordinary extraordinary, to me, that kind of measurable impact on a large scale was just something I simply had to bring to all of you. So let's get in and get started and meet this legend of purpose, Mr. Ken Kragen. Hello, good day, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world, everyone. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and thank you for tuning into A World on Purpose. I am today over the moon about my guest, and it's really hard to give this man a proper introduction because he's done extraordinary things. So without further ado, I'm not even going to go into that yet. I just want to welcome to my show someone who I just revere and adore and admire on every level, Mr. Ken Kragen, CEO, currently co-CEO of Good Hands Productions, but he's done way more than that, and wait till you hear it. So Ken Kragen, thank you for coming on A World on Purpose with me today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I love this stuff.
It's great, right?
Yeah. No. I mean, a lot of this latter part of my life has been reaching out to inspire people, particularly young people. Right. So this fits right into that.
Well, that's great. Well, before I go into a few little tidbits of what you've done, I really like you to be able to tell in your own words your story, but I'll just give people a little teaser. But before I do that, why don't you tell everybody where you're coming live from today with me?
Yeah, I'm in my home office, which I now occupy, pandemic or no pandemic. I have since about 2006 or 8. I think I sold my office building in West Hollywood in Los Angeles area and came home for a month. And at the end of the month realized how nice it was to be able to roll out of bed, throw on some workout clothes, come down, get on your computer and work. And for a long time, for, 4 or 5 years, I had an assistant coming in every day. Now I don't even do that. But wow. I do have 4 or 5 projects and I'm still working and having a good time.
I know. Well, you are actually I mean, you are on so many levels the real example of what we try to showcase on this show about somebody who's really stepped into a purpose-driven life and the things that you've created. I'm just going to tease out a little bit of some of the things that you've done. First of all, you were a manager and you managed some pretty amazing careers. Kenny Rogers, Lionel Richie, Olivia Newton-John, and one of my favorites, the Bee Gees, who I listen to on a regular basis. But
there's a great special on the Bee Gees out there right now. I recommend highly people should watch.
I saw that. I haven't watched it yet. Are you in it?
Not really, but we watched it. My wife and I watched it about 3 nights ago, and it's really good.
Oh, great. Well, that's on my to-do list for sure. And then you have some pretty proud accomplishments where you've received the United Nations Peace Medal. You're an alumnus of the year from UC Berkeley, and you also were the first inductee to the Personal Managers Hall of Fame. But that does not cover it. You actually are the conceiver and organizer of some pretty prolific and profound things that most people of all ages, I hope, have heard of. One being Hands Across America, Net Aid, parts of Live Aid, President Clinton's 1992 inauguration, and especially today, which I'm going to let you tell people what today is, We Are the World.
Yep. I got a call from the executive director of USA for Africa, which is still very, very much in operation. And that was the organization we put together after recording We Are the World. And that was on this particular date that we're doing this interview, January 28th, 36 years ago, we recorded We Are the World. And the wild part of that is that 2 years ago, it still brought in $439,000 from downloads.
Wow.
And we only get a small piece of each download. And last year, I just checked with the executive director because she called me today to remind me this was the actual recording date. That last year we did 400,000.
Wow.
And we're giving grants away in the 200 to 300,000 to, individuals and organizations in Africa and the US that deal with the issues we were focused on 36 years ago, which were hunger and homelessness.
Right.
And we're still giving grants to people doing good work in that area.
And it's still sadly an extraordinarily needed support, right?
Neither of the we never thought we would eliminate those issues, but they're stronger than ever now, especially with the pandemic. Hunger and homelessness and issues of people losing their homes and stuff are just rampant right now.
Yeah.
So we're delighted that we're still able to do good work and support. We don't have a field force. We have one executive director. We have practically no overhead. But we support all those people out there doing good things, particularly women in Africa. A lot of times the men have left and gone to the big cities. The women are running the villages and the organizations. And a lot of what we do is train or give them the resources to organize their communities and to help people stay out of those issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we're gonna talk a little more in depth as we get into the interview about how you organize that and the passion behind it and all these other wonderful things you've done, Ken, and some great new things that you're doing. But before I have you get into your what I like to call your origin story and your pivot to purpose, I personally want to thank you for what you've done for homelessness and for hunger, because you probably remember my story growing up homeless as a kid, on and off for the first 13 years of my life. And that song and that work you've done always really deeply connected to my heart. So thank you for everything you've done for people that have no way to get out of that situation. So I'm excited that today's the anniversary of that, 36 years. What a serendipitous day to be interviewing you. I mean, how cool.
Just a coincidence, but a good one.
I know, it's very cool. So let's talk a little bit about what got you here. I mean, my fascination with purpose is I love to find out what the impetus was for people who decided, I have all this talent, this skill, these networks that I want to actually not just make profit in life. I want to turn that into profit for purpose. I want to pivot to purpose. And I'd love for you to share, just about your life and your backstory and what was the impetus for you doing all these incredible things that you've accomplished that we're going to get into later.
Well, I grew up in not a extremely wealthy family, but a middle class family with a father who was a very successful lawyer, and at a top firm. He was the managing director for a while of a firm called Loeb and Loeb in Los Angeles, which in the 40s and 50s was the number one entertainment law firm, and still is to a great extent one of the top ones. And so I didn't grow up so much in need, but my family, particularly my mom and my dad, were incredibly generous people. In fact, it just hit me. I remembered telling my mom one time that she had to concentrate for a change on doing things for herself and not just for other people. And she actually started to cry because her purpose in life was to help everybody she could in every way she could, volunteering, in hospitals and in my dad by that time, and this is a great story. This is probably the most inspirational story of that part of my life. I was 15 when the University of California at Berkeley, where my dad had graduated and where he'd met my mom and where we'd lived in the early years of when I was born. My dad was offered, UC Berkeley offered my dad $12,500 a year, a fraction of what he was making as a big time lawyer, to come back and teach law at the law school, then called Bolt Hall. It's changed now, but at Berkeley. And he decided to do it. And we moved from Los Angeles, where we'd been living, back to Berkeley, so my dad could take this position teaching. And he stayed there for 42 years. He taught classes till he was 87. He chaired committees till he was 95. He died in his sleep at 98, or just about 98, a month or so before. And it was a phenomenal demonstration. Do what I do rather than what I say. He demonstrated by action that what wasn't important to him was the money. What was important to him was doing what he loved. And he loved teaching, and he loved the university, and and my mom and he were extremely happy back there. And I ended up going there. I'm actually alumnus of the year there, as you mentioned. And he is too. He was 10 years after me. They made him alumnus of the year. He should have had it way before me.
Wow.
And they were just the most generous people. They were, you in the notes you sent me, you said, what changed your orientation from profit to helping others and to having this purpose in life? I never changed. The profit was never what drove me. It drives me a little more now because I need it to live.
Right.
Because I don't have the income, and the pandemic has made that even more difficult. But the fact of the matter is that it never has been what motivated me. And so I never had that pivot point. I had inspiration points. Harry Chapin, my client, in the late 70s and early 80s, before he passed away in a car accident on the Long Island Expressway in 1981, Harry was tremendously involved in the issues of hunger and homelessness in America. And he inspired me. He taught me how bad those things were, how many children were going to bed hungry every night in America. And he fought for that every way he could to change all that, and drew me into that. I was already oriented towards doing things for others, but it became very focused. And not long after Harry died, was when I organized We Are the World and raised what's now over $100 million for those issues, and incredible attention. Those projects not only brought in a lot of money, both Hands Across America, which we did a year and a half later. This is the jacket from Hands Across America. You can see the back. Yeah, a friend of mine who did jackets for Disney and everybody. She made one for me and one for my wife, and we stood. Hands Across America, a lot of your viewers might be too young to remember. On the other hand, a lot of them might have been in the line.
Yeah.
We did 5.5 million people from New York to LA standing, holding hands in one continuous line, and then another million around the world doing it wherever they were. And we literally moved the needle on the coverage of these issues. We inspired the people that were working on them, both in Africa and in the U.S. And that I attribute that to the inspiration of Harry Chapin. He inspired my client Kenny Rogers to do a lot in those areas. Kenny had grown up 8 kids living in a room when they had a room to live in, and Kenny jumped in a big way. In fact, I remember Kenny at one concert. Harry would go out and earn $1,000 to play in your backyard and raise some money for a cause, even though he made a lot more than that when he was out doing his concerts. But he never made what Kenny did. Kenny handed Harry a check for $180,000 after a concert he did. I don't remember where it was, but it was the only time I ever saw Harry Chapin speechless. So when Harry died, Kenny literally picked up the torch and carried it forward. So those were tremendous inspirations for me in these areas. And then once you get a reputation for doing that, it just those kind of things come to you. And I did a bunch more, and I'm doing an enormous one now, although we'll talk about it later, but it's focused on climate change.
I know. And that's going to be very exciting to talk about, because we're going to compare then to now.
Quite a bit different.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into the details of that, because what you were able to do back in the day when we had virtually no digital communication is extraordinary to me. So I want to touch on that. But before we do that, I want to ask you a little bit about your clients, because I love that you always felt that thing inside of you from your parents, and that it wasn't a pivot. It was just a series of events, which I think is great, because everybody's experience to purpose is different. When you were working with celebrities, did you find, it seems like now celebrities are far more engaged, or at least publicly, because of digital media, that they show what they're about and supporting. Was it harder back then, or was it pretty easy to get your celebrity clients and people involved in things like, let's talk about We Are the World? Like, first, let's start with that. Like, getting people engaged. Was it like a no-brainer, or was it?
Well, yeah, but that's a whole different discussion. We can certainly do it right now. It was such a different time. I represented in 1981 and 82, I represented 40 as a manager, 48% of the top 10 records. Billboard actually did a story about it.
Wow.
48% of the top 10 records in America were my clients. So I had 5 or 6 huge clients, not only Kenny Rogers and Lionel Richie, but the Jay Giles Band and and Kim Carnes and Lindsey Buckingham. And, we had 48% of the top 10 records over an 18-month period. So when I got ready to pick up the phone or to drive, as it was, to Lionel Richie's house, on the way to Lionel's house, I confirmed 2 or 3 artists on by that time I had a cell phone or a phone in the car. And I by the time I got to Lionel's house, I already had Kenny Rogers, probably, and Kim Carnes involved. And then I asked Lionel to write the song with Stevie Wonder. It's a great story, actually, because he tried Stevie all night and couldn't get him. And the next morning, which was the day before Christmas, and Belafonte had called me the day before, and we talked and come up with this idea of doing the record. Belafonte wanted to do a concert, and I talked him into doing a record because the example had been set by Bob Geldof in England. Anyway, I asked Lionel to write the song with Stevie Wonder. He couldn't reach Stevie. And it just shows you, blessed projects, things just happen. And Brenda Ritchie, Lionel's wife in those days, went into a jewelry store to buy last-minute gifts. It was the day before Christmas. And who walks into the store but Stevie Wonder?
You're kidding me.
I don't know if he recognized Lionel. Someone would have had to tell him that it was that not Lionel, but Lionel's wife, Brenda. But he asked Brenda to help him pick out jewelry as gifts. And Brenda said, not till you return my husband's call. And they found Lionel in a dentist chair. And Stevie agreed to write the song with Lionel.
Wow.
And while that was all going on, I tracked down my friend Quincy Jones. He was about to get on a plane, on the Warner Brothers plane, to fly to Hawaii to spend Christmas in Hawaii. And I said, Quincy, will you produce it? And he said, absolutely. And, we'd all seen these pictures of children dying in Africa. It was a major crisis. And I said, will you get a hold of Michael Jackson, who he was producing at the time with all those big records, and see if he'll perform as one of the performers? Well, he called me back in 30 minutes and said, Michael's certainly willing to perform, but he wants to write the song with Stevie and Lionel. Well, as it worked out, it was only Michael and Lionel that wrote the song because Stevie completely disappeared. Turns out he went to Philadelphia. No one knew where he was. He's still to this day very hard to reach. And nobody could find him. And he walked into the recording studio 2 days before, or actually the day they were recording the song, which they had only completed 2 nights before. Stevie walked in and said, let's write the song. Unfortunately, with a totally blind man, he can't see everyone's mouth going.
Yeah, like, oh no.
They were all like, oh my God, but Stevie made a few suggestions, listened to what they had done, and left. And so he never actually wrote the song. He did bring at the recording session 2 Ethiopian women in to talk to the group. And he pushed to get some Swahili lyrics in there, but the group voted against it. They didn't want to do that, but they did put some kind of lyrics in there that were made up that Lionel or Michael put in. But when you hear the song, but Stevie was a great contributor to it. I mean, having Stevie as one of the performers was tremendous. But that was kind of the early story. And the point was that in those days, I could pick up the phone, nowadays, and then too, if you made a call to a manager or an agent, the first question was, who else do you have?
Right.
Well, I had 5 huge artists before I even had to make an outside call. And so I could say, well, I've got the song being produced by Quincy Jones and Lionel and Michael, and I thought Stevie writing it, and I've got Kim Carnes and Lindsey Buckingham and others performing on it. And I was home free. I didn't have to say this is going to be a big deal. It already was. And then when Bruce Springsteen came along and joined on the 15th of January, and agreed to do it, then I never had to make another outgoing call. The rockers suddenly, everybody wanted to stand next to Bruce Springsteen. And Lionel Richie has a line, you are who you hug. And everybody wanted to hug Bruce. So all I did was literally turn people down because I wanted 15 people to record like Geldof had done in England. We ended up with 45.
Yeah.
So, Michael brought his brothers and sisters in. Huey Lewis insisted that he have the News, his group, and so on. So anyway, there's a lot more. I mean, we could do the whole hour on We Are the World.
I know there's just not enough time. I might have to do more segments with you later. But that's a great place for us to take a quick break because we're gonna have a little musical interlude here. And I want to talk a little bit more about We Are the World and then dive into some of these other things that you created. So let's just take a quick break and we'll be right back, everyone. So I'm back here after a quick break with my amazing guest, Ken Kragen, who's currently co-CEO of Good Hand Productions. And we were talking about his creation, ideation, and actual execution of, for many of you who hopefully have heard, We Are the World, as kind of an amazing purpose-driven initiative to support hunger. So Ken, we were talking about that a little bit, and I wanted to get a little bit deeper into that for a second because you were talking about how easy it was to pick up the phone and get these people going. Do you think that that's more of a challenge now?
Well, for me, it is. Everybody will take my call, But the same question evolves: who do you have? And we have some lovely people already for this. We haven't discussed the project, but the new project we're working on, Hands Around the World, which we're doing for climate change. And it's hard because I don't have the leverage that I had then. Then I had clients that people wanted. They either wanted their artists to perform with my clients, or if I was going after a TV show exposure for the record or a radio station, I had tremendous leverage. Nowadays, I have recognition. I have, I guess I can say, admiration for what I pulled off, but I don't have that ability for pick up the phone, call somebody and say, I need your client to be part of this, especially with the biggest clients, that there are, the biggest celebrities.
Sure.
I don't have the same leverage. It's much harder for me to pull those people in. There are people out there, there are managers out there who are in the position I was. But the other part of it is you have to, I lecture on the concept that it's easier to accomplish the impossible than the ordinary.
I love that line of yours.
And projects of mine, like We Are the World, bringing those artists together, were considered impossible, which meant that people maybe said you were crazy, he'll never pull it off, but at least they were talking about it.
Right.
And you already had interest, and you had, and people would, and then the minute they saw you were having success, everybody wanted to be part of history. Now it's much harder to launch stuff because the concept of bringing artists together to do things like that has long been overworked. It within the first year after We Are the World, there were half a dozen projects like it. And Geldof actually had started the big one before, the Do They Know It's Christmas recording.
Oh, right.
And then, of course, he did Live Aid, which I helped with. I did help work on the U.S. Finale and stuff here in Philadelphia. But nowadays, it's not uncommon. And with the pandemic, all kinds of artists have come together to do recordings. And, I've seen some sensational shows that have been put together. But it means, artists can only agree to so many things.
Right.
And so it's much harder. It's much more difficult nowadays because it's not unique. It's not impossible to pull these kinds of things off. It doesn't get the same kind of attention that it would, and people don't leap on board in the same way. The project we're doing, Hands Around the World, just briefly, is to get 1 billion people to hold hands in virtual reality, in the series of lines that'll circle the earth numerous times,
right?
And create both finance and data to help the whole environmental climate change issues get resolved. So we're working on that now. But even that's hard to get financing for, hard to get the right key people involved. And I've been working much this week, finally, to get Robert Redford, who's big in the environmental area, on to maybe see if he would want to spearhead this project. He's a founding member of the resource. It's called
NRDC.
NRDC, and he's perfect for this. But his son died. He went into seclusion for quite a while. We had to wait several months. We started going after him in September. It's a constant battle nowadays to pull these things off. But I'm tenacious, and I don't ever believe it can't be done. In fact, the more difficult it seems, the more I feel it is something we need to make happen.
I agree with you. Well, let's talk about that for a second, because even though you're describing how it's more challenging now, let's go back in time to Hands Across America. Okay.
Impossible.
Completely
impossible. When you're flying across, when you finally get on a plane, which isn't soon for anybody now, but when you finally get on a plane to New York from LA, or the opposite way, or anywhere where you're going across large swaths of the country, look down there and imagine people in a continuous line from New York through 17 states to California, people holding hands.
Incredible.
5.5 million people holding hands, another million in other states and even overseas holding hands. You know, impossible,
Well,
totally impossible. And we pulled it off. And we pulled it off by getting enough attention for it because it was unique enough, completely different than anything had ever been done. In fact, when it was presented to me at a performance of "We Are the World" at the New York City Ballet. Our publicist on the "We Are the World" project came at intermission to my wife and me and said, "Don't laugh, but what if we strung people from New York to LA holding hands and singing 'We Are the World' all at one moment in time?" And I'm very proud of my response because it was spontaneous. I said, "I'm not laughing. It's just impossible enough to be possible." And that became my mantra.
wow.
And has to this day, that it's easier to accomplish the impossible than the ordinary. But once we got a little traction, once it looked like we might pull it off, everybody wanted to be part of it.
That's great.
And it was surprising. We had 40,000 monitors out there, strung out there, organizing the line all the way across America. And the stories were almost always the same. They'd have practically nobody there till the last few minutes. And then over the hill, like the cavalry, would come masses of people and get in line in the last 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't true everywhere, but it was true a lot of places. And Kenny Rogers went out in the middle of the desert and did a concert on the border of New Mexico and Oklahoma, or New Mexico or Oklahoma and Texas. I can't remember. No, I think it was New Mexico and Texas. He did a concert and got 10,000 people out to string into a line out there.
Incredible.
He went on television and said, "Don't leave me out there by myself. I'll be there. I'll do a show for you." He brought his band. They put up a stage and he did a show in the middle of nowhere.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I have to ask you about the logistics, because I hear you explain a little earlier how hard it is to get people to participate now, maybe because of not the uniqueness and everything, but there's no holds barred that you did this in a time when there was no digital communication. How did you do that? How did you get so many people?
I did have, by the time it came off, a cell phone, a portable phone in a briefcase.
the military phone?
I don't know where maybe it was developed for the military, but I had a briefcase that you could, call out on this phone on your briefcase. But that certainly wasn't, we didn't have those everywhere across the country. We had offices in every city we went through.
Wow.
We had 40,000 monitors or volunteers, but we also had organization. We were organized like a political campaign. And in fact, it was an off political year. There weren't campaigns going on. So we hired the guy running it, a guy named Fred Dresch. I think it was Fred Roche. He was a political guy who organized, campaigns and getting people out to hear speeches by candidates and so on. And when he would do that, it was the same kind of organization for We Are the World. There were committees in every city.
Wow.
And they would meet and they would plan and they would solicit people to come out and they would organize their areas. And we had a couple of breaks in the line. We had one forced on us by the Arizona government. There was 200 miles of desert that they came up with some fantastical idea that people were going to die out there in the heat. And it wasn't true, but they took those 200 miles away from us. Probably did us a blessing. It probably would have been hard to fill them, but you never know. And there was a break in Arkansas. I'm not sure why, because Clinton was really behind this, both Hillary and Bill. But overall, we had a continuous line from New York. It went through like 14 states before there was any breaks. starting in New York at the Battery Park. So it was an amazing, effort. Impossible, but we did it.
And you raised
I always say I have just enough naivete to think these things can be done.
I know, which I love that about you, though. That's a little bit of the brilliance and the genius of it, honestly.
It's just stay a kid,
Right.
Just forget that somebody says you can't. In fact, if they say you can't do it, let it motivate you to prove them wrong.
I think that's absolutely right. And you raised a lot of money from Hands Across America. You want to tell people?
Hands Across America raised about 34 million, but in combination with We Are the World, we're well over 100 million now.
That's absolutely
and doing good every year. I mean, amazing that this past year we just did 400,000 in downloads of We Are the World. I mean, I don't know what we make per download, but it's not a lot. $400,000 represents many more than that in way of downloads. We don't make $1 a download because you can download it for 99 cents.
Yeah, and
we only get a portion of that.
Right. And I do remember last year when we all went into lockdown, I remember seeing people actually on social media saying, we need to bring back We Are the World so that we all feel like we're in this together. That song.
Well, and Hands Across America, they particularly focus on, we've got to do a Hands Across America again to bring unity and people together. And I explain why that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Hands Around the World that we're doing now makes sense because it's in virtual reality.
Right.
And on your cell phone, you can hold hands with celebrities and be a part of this. But we haven't launched that yet.
Right.
We're still looking for a bunch of the financing. We raised a few 100,000, but we need a few million, and we're still working on that. Well, but what I was very pleased in the last week or so is the enormous focus, just this week alone, enormous focus of the new administration on climate change. Mm-hmm. That's going to help us. It's going to help us.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit deeper about that because towards the end of the show, we're going to do a call to action to get people involved and excited about Hands Across the World. But I want to touch a little bit more on two other great things. And we're going to talk about a book that you're writing as well.
Briefly, there's not a lot to talk about it, although we have an outline for it now.
Okay, great. Well, I want to talk a little bit about USA for Africa. That raised several 100,000, correct? Or 700 million.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that and Live Aid, because I know those were two pretty big events, like massive.
Well, Bob Geldof came to me. We flew him over for We Are the World, and he told me about his Live Aid idea, and I thought he was crazy. It's crazy. It's silly for me to say that, but like everybody else, I had been trying to pull off a big concert for a year for Hunger and Homeless in America, and hadn't been able to put it together. So I thought there's no way he's going to do this, but he asked me to produce the Philadelphia portion of it, and right before the concert itself in July, I was going to be in June for a few weeks in Africa with the first supplies. So there's no way I could be producing a concert in Philadelphia while I was physically in Africa. So I recommended Bill Graham, the promoter out of San Francisco. Problem was that Bill Graham had alienated a bunch of the African-American stars like Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie and Stevie Wonder and stuff. And he couldn't get them, and he needed them badly for a Live Aid show. He couldn't do a Live Aid show primarily to raise funds for Africa without a significant number of Black artists. And so he kept calling me. He would call me practically every day. And what I did was reach out to Belafonte, Harry Belafonte, who was appearing right at the time of the Live Aid show in Atlantic City. So I got a helicopter to fly him in during the day and fly him back for his show that night. I reached out to Lionel, who was still my client at that point, and Lionel was very doubtful that Geldof was going to pull it off. So Lionel insisted that when I got back from Africa, I get on a plane and go to Philadelphia and scope out if it was real and going to happen, which I did. And kept calling Lionel and saying, it's real, it's happening. He's got a huge number of artists. You've got to be part of this. And finally, at the last minute, Lionel agreed to come. But at that point, then Geldof said, we've got to do as the very last thing, We Are the World.
Mhm.
So I had to fly Tom Baylor, the arranger, in, and we started teaching the people that were there who hadn't been part of the original recording. Some of them were, but most of them weren't.
Mhm.
We had to teach them the parts and organize that and create it right there, backstage. We were the day before and the day of, we were rehearsing people in a dressing room backstage in Philadelphia. And then we did the song, and what was great for me was Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul and Mary saw me standing on the side of the stage, grabbed me, pulled me, and I ended up standing with Peter, Paul and Mary singing the song. I can still, in the video of the song, I can pick myself out. I mean, thank God nobody could hear me. I've got a terrible singing voice. But I followed through. I mean, I was there, 90,000 people in front of us and millions all over the world.
That's
and that
great.
raised a ton of money.
Yeah.
That was huge. And then, a little less than a year from then, we did Hands Across America.
Right.
But that was for hunger and homelessness in America.
And my musical history is probably going to be terrible here, but was Live Aid the last concert that Freddie Mercury did with Queen too?
I don't know that it was the last concert. It was maybe the last huge event like that. I know it's in the movie.
Yeah, that's what
they did about him. Yeah, and watching that movie and then going back to looking at the Live Aid Queen performance, because I'm a huge Queen fan.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at it, they had everything down to the cups on the piano. They duplicated everything perfectly.
Cool.
And I mean, to me, Freddie Mercury's passing was one of the great tragedies of the music business.
Yeah,
there have been a number of them, but that one was.
I agree.
Was one of my biggest losses. My biggest loss was Harry Chapin, but
sure.
losing Freddie Mercury and Queen. I did go to Las Vegas to see a show done from the Queen music some years back. That was really, really fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, these are all such great stories, Ken, because it just really shows the magnitude of your purpose to not think the impossible is impossible. And we're going to take a quick break and then actually start jumping into the fact that you're also an educator and you teach people these amazing things called the magic of threes, which I want you to tell people about, because part of our deal here on our show is we want to give people tools. Yeah. So let's take a quick break and then everyone come back and we're going to jump into this third part of our segment here with our amazing Ken Kragen. Please come back and we'll take a break now and we'll see you in a minute. Okay, everyone, we're back from our break, and I'm here with my outstanding, stellar example of a man living in his life on purpose, Ken Kragen, co-CEO of Good Hands Productions. And Ken, you've talked all about these incredible things you've done, from We Are the World to Hands Across America to Live Aid. But I want to kind of jump into some of the really special things you do to help people learn how to live this life on purpose and not to give up and be very intentional. And you're an educator. Can you talk a little bit about your work at UCLA and your magic?
Yeah, I started out, what was interesting was a couple of agents from William Morris invited me to speak at a class they were teaching at UCLA. And remember, my father had been an educator for years, a professor at Berkeley, and I'd gone and sat in his class some of the time, and he was very unique. And I was up there giving my talk, and the weirdest experience, I was also standing on the side watching me as if I was my father.
Wow.
It was a weird, I don't have those kind of experiences very often in my life. And the only one other one I remember like that was that eerie, was a feeling during We Are the World that Harry Chapin had crawled up inside me and was controlling everything, and he had passed away by that point. But in this case,
great.
Watching myself, I got a big kick out of how much I was, what was the right, recreating or duplicating what my father had done, that I look like my father anyway. And that had always been the case. And just thinking, you're being your dad again, you know? And after I gave that lecture, the woman who ran extension program at UCLA came after me for several years to finally get me to teach a class at UCLA in the extension program.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for 8 years in the evenings, starting at about usually about 7 o'clock, going to 10 o'clock. And the classes were huge. I don't ever try to do anything halfway. And I created a whole promotion for it. And I had classes of 250 students, you know. It was amazing, from all over. I mean, there was some of them were UCLA students. Many of them were, you know, people that were older. And I brought phenomenal guests in. And I taught this class for 3 hours a night, except that I did so many fun things with it, including the UCLA marching band marching through there. And I'll actually explain that in a minute when we talk about Magic of Threes. Mm-hmm. I really put effort into class. In fact, I spent 100 hours going back over my whole career and looking at what had I done that was successful for myself and my clients, and where had I failed. You can learn more very often when you don't do it, when you fail, and you fail at something, and you think, oh God, you know, I didn't do that, that I did in all the successful times. So I learned a lot, and I gave these classes there, and had incredible guests as well. And the students never wanted to quit at the end of the evening. It got so it was once a week, and I would bribe the custodian who would come in and want us to close down so he could clean the room. I would give him $20 to leave us alone for another half hour or an hour. And we would go to 10, but we'd end up going to 11. And then I heard the classes would leave and go to a restaurant and continue till midnight.
Oh my God.
It was crazy. You know, it was a great experience for me, and it was a great experience for the class. But I always wanted to teach undergraduate. I felt the best time to get to people were particularly seniors who were about to graduate. But, you know, I always started with a theme that your career was not your life. Your career was one of the tools you used to have the best life possible. Mm-hmm. So you wanted to find a career that serviced your life, and not the other way around. And I explained and showed them ways that they could define what career would really make their life. They'd go to work no matter whether they were getting paid or not, because the career was so fulfilling and so fun, and so much something they felt they were contributing to, which is what I had done for my whole life.
Right.
And my dad had done. He'd set that example way back. So I ended up, very fortunately, getting into the music school and started teaching the course in the music school, smaller classes, because the room I was in only held 144 or 140 students. We'd usually overbook it a little because some kids wouldn't show up every day, and so we'd usually book 144 or 45. But that class would sell out in 2 days. In fact, my biggest problem was all the students that would call me and say, I can't get in. Now, they weren't just from the music school. About 40 of the students came from the music school, but there were conflicts with other classes, music classes that they had to take. So we'd only get about 40 of the music school students, but we'd get 100 students from all around the campus.
Wow.
Anybody was allowed to come in and take it. It cost them. It was expensive. The school made money on it. Mm-hmm. But I did that for 3 years until they had a cutback there. Mm-hmm. And my department head had never looked at the evaluation forms, which said it was the most fun they ever had in a class, the best class they ever took, and it changed their life. Almost every form said that. and he had never read them. He'd never come to the class. So when he was told to cut, he cut my class. And I'd found out about it from an assistant. He didn't even tell me. But the only good thing is he's no longer in that position.
Well, maybe they'll bring you back.
Yeah, no, it
would be great.
I haven't really talked about it, and I don't know. Now with the pandemic, it's just as well I wasn't teaching this year. But I would spend the time and the effort. And one of the things when I did that research back that I learned was something called the magic of threes. I looked all the way back to the years in which I was managing the Smothers Brothers. And right in the beginning, I found that 3 exposures in a week coming from different directions made an enormous difference. They had 49 sellouts after that. And I realized that in order to get anybody to take action, you needed multiple impressions in a concentrated period of time coming from different directions. And that you could apply that to almost anything in life, your personal life. You could apply it to if you were in class and trying to impress a professor. You could apply it if you were going out for a job. I would teach people how to go out for a job and have someone call in advance and talk to whoever the interviewer was about giving you enough time to present properly. And then I would tell the students, you then go in there, you listen, you bring something you can leave that's memorable because you've done your research on the company and that person and that person's interests. You leave something with them that's memorable, that doesn't feel like just kissing up, that you really did your homework. And then when you leave, you sit down and you write a note thanking them and pointing out where you fit the things they're looking for, because you asked them specifically about so you covered that individual with 3 events in the same day. You take that note back there and drop it off, handwritten, different than what they're used to. They're used to tweets and emails and Instagrams. And you go back with something. I consider the whole social network one direction. If you're coming at somebody through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or whatever, you're only coming from one direction. It may seem like 3, but if they see you and read it on one, when they go to the next one, they're not going to pay any attention.
I agree with that.
They're just going to trash it, especially if they're not strongly interested. So I would teach the magic of threes. I have a lot of examples of it. And in fact, I've got a book. I don't make anything on it, so I'm happy to push it. It's called Life is a Contact Sport.
Oh, wow.
And that book has sold a lot, and it's made huge impact. I hear from people even I don't know, wrote the book in 1994. I mean, all these years later, I still hear from people saying, your book made all the difference in my life.
Wow.
I welcome people to look for it. It's called Life is a Contact Sport. You can find it. A friend of mine just bought it for his son on eBay, on Amazon.
Great.
He had to pay $32 for it. I've seen it on Amazon or eBay where they're selling it for a penny, but you have to pay $10 shipping. So they're making the money on the handling and shipping.
Oh my God.
That's
crazy.
But I don't make anything from it. So, I just don't like to see people pay too much for it. But he got a brand new copy of the hardback for $32, which if it helps his son's career blossom, then it's probably worth the investment.
I agree with you. Great.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great tool for people to know about, because I do remember you talking about those classes and how packed they were, and those meaningful life words of wisdom that you could give to people for their career, for their journey.
Sitting in bed at home with my wife after the class had finished, after the 10 weeks, reading they would give me copies of the evaluation form, was so meaningful to me that I would say, I've got to go back and teach next year. Look at the impact this is having on on students' lives.
Yeah.
And I just, couldn't help but want to do it on a regular basis. I'd still love to do more of it, although I'm not as physically. I've had a lot of during the pandemic. I've had a lot of medical issues.
Mhm.
I don't know what my stamina would be for the 3 hours of teaching now, but I'm sure I could do it.
Well,
And
I'm gonna advocate for online content because I think you could.
Well,
probably
that's where what
it.
I really should be doing. I just have to find. I was thinking about it yesterday. I have to find somebody who's willing to organize it. I'm willing to give
Right.
up, a significant piece of the profits if somebody. I've got the material.
Yeah,
I have
you
all
do.
the material. It's just and I have video. We taped all 30 hours every year for the 3 years.
Wow, you're kidding. That's
I
incredible.
had a video crew in there for and I have phenomenal guests: Lionel Richie, Quincy Jones, David Foster,
So cool.
the heads of studios, actors. Some who are no longer with us. Burt Reynolds, he was great.
Yeah, I bet.
Lots of fun folks. That every week somebody.
Yeah.
You can. Anybody wants to go sort of see what the class is about, even though I'm not teaching, go to YouTube and go to Ken Kragen UCLA Sizzle.
Okay.
Or Sizzle Reel, but I think it's UCLA Sizzle, and it will come up, and it's 7 minutes long. It shows a number of the guests talking about what the class is, and I would teach the first hour and a half and have a guest for the last hour and a half. It's a Herb Alpert School of Music. I had Herb and his wife come twice, and the school could never get him for anything, and the school's in his name.
That's
I got them to come twice, and they were sensational.
So cool.
And they're real lovebirds, and they would sit there holding hands, and you could just tell how wonderful they were with each other.
Awesome. Well, I love that you said it brought you so much meaning, because that's really what we're trying to advocate here on the show. And everything that you've done everything that you've done in the past up till now has given you exceptional meaning in your life, which is wonderful. So let's just, before we wrap the show, let's talk a little bit about that next step for you. You mentioned it earlier, Hands Across the World. Can you just give people
Hands Around the World?
Hands Around the World. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't want to go back. People have asked me constantly to do Hands Across America, and it isn't unique anymore. It's not impossible. It's been done. Hands Around the World is virtual. We won't launch it till at least next summer. We're still raising the funds to do it properly. But it fits perfectly into what the new administration is doing. It's an umbrella to raise what we'd hope to get 1 billion people contributing at least 99 cents each to download the app that allows them to reach out and hold hands in a hologram with stars of their choice. Our plan is to film 500 to 1,000 celebrities from all over the world, and then they can pick from that list one to hold each hand, or it might be Jane Pauley on one hand and Jane Goodall on one, holding one hand, and a chimpanzee holding the other, Or we've talked about you could have the Pope on one hand and the Dalai Lama on the other.
Oh my God, great.
We want to get that kind of celebrity involved and have you be able to download that. We want to raise literally several $1 billion. And most importantly, that we can then support all the people doing great work in the environment.
Right.
And we want to raise an outreach list of names and email addresses where you can educate people about what they can and should do and call them to action.
Great.
So they can work in their local communities and they can influence their nations and their corporation that they buy from and so on. And we've worked on this about 1 year now or more, really. And we've got something super here. We just have to get it funded.
Great.
And
well, I have absolutely no doubt that you are not going to make this happen, Ken Kragen.
Yeah, no, we're definitely planning to make it happen and hanging in there and working on it. It's not easy, but we're working hard on it.
I know. Well, you're such an inspiration to me and to so many people, the lives that you've touched. in your personal life, in your career, your friendships. It's just such an honor to have you on the show and talk about that path to purpose that you've led from, young youth to now. And I think if anybody is looking to find a guide to help them think that they can do the impossible, especially when purpose is involved, it's you.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, they can always get my email's easy. It's kenkragen@aol.com, just KenKragen@AOL. And, I try to answer everybody. I can't always. I certainly don't get involved in every project that's pitched at me. Sure. Only the occasional few that really spark me feeling we're doing something, like the Hands Around the World project, or I'm working on a movie project on the life of Lilly Ledbetter, the woman who, there's actually a law that Obama passed, the equality of women in the workplace. So she worked for years at, I think, GE or one of them, where she was not treated equally with men, and complained, and ultimately got nowhere, and ultimately sued, and they made a law about it. It's women's equality law. It's called the Lilly Ledbetter Law that Obama got through in 2008. And her whole life story, I mean, as a kid, to be a cheerleader, she had to pick cotton to get money to get a cheerleading outfit.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, she grew up in the South, a Caucasian woman, a young girl who had very rough time, and then worked for this company for years where they, treated her second class, even though she worked hard and did great work. So it's a great story. It's really something. And I'm working on a book. I've been working on that for a couple of years. I've had 2 writers work on it. We've got an outline now. We had a publisher, but I've just not been able to come up with enough money to keep a writer on. Yeah. So it's just this is a tougher time for me financially, but I'm not poor. I'm just getting through.
Well, you know what? I really appreciate that transparency, Ken, because I think a lot of people feel like they're failing in some way right now because there's so many things going on. And it's nice that you've done all these incredible things, and yet you can still talk openly about where you are. And I really appreciate that.
The pandemic cost me several speeches, and
sure. Yeah. You did a lot of speaking. I remember.
Yeah. So, and a lot of other things, projects I was working on have been harder to get done. But hey, I just hang in there and have a good time and try to make a difference in the world. Saving the planet to me is sort of my hopeful, the last perhaps big thing, the biggest ever I've done. If we can get 1 billion people out there, it'll certainly be the biggest event of its kind ever.
Well,
so, I'm still having a good time.
That's great. Well, Ken, from hunger and homelessness to the planet, I am so proud of you and so honored. And I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much. And everyone will be able to find you. All your information will be at a World on Purpose website, all your contact info and all the projects you're working on. And for everybody who wants to get to know Ken, please go to aworldonpurpose.com. You'll see it all on his episode page. And we really appreciate you tuning in. Ken, thank you for being here. And I am going to do whatever I can to try to make this show help hands around the world.
Great. My pleasure.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Alyssa.
Thanks, Ken. Have a great day, everybody. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and thank you for tuning in to A World on Purpose.
Thank you for taking this journey into A World on Purpose with our incredible guests. To learn more about our amazing guests and their inspiring purpose-driven work, please go to aworldonpurpose.com. Don't forget to look at our call to action of the week to mobilize your desire for purpose into action. A World on Purpose can be found on Apple Podcasts and all the major podcast platforms, and the video version can be found on YouTube. If what you heard today inspires you, please write a review and like and share on the platform of your choice. We'd love to also hear from you and learn your pivot to purpose and the meaningful work that you do that lifts humanity. Send your stories to info@aworldonpurpose.com. I'd like to thank our World on Purpose team for making this show a reality. Once again, I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris. Thank you for tuning in to A World on Purpose. I look forward to seeing you soon.